Welcome, everybody, to another Microsoft Unboxed podcast. This is episode 19, the big Microsoft build discussion. I am your host today, Kareem Anderson. I'm joined by,
His build assistant, David Allen. Hope everybody's doing well. We're all building this week. We built some pretty cool stuff.
and by assistant, he means actual person, not AI, voice or assistant. He is here or in studio while virtually he's an actual person. But we will be talking about plenty of assistant stuff because of what Microsoft had to dish out. This is going to be kind of a more free flowing pod this time around because we have a lot to talk about. There aren't necessarily a bunch of different headlines. We're not dealing with the EU. We're not really talking about gaming, so to speak. There's not a lot in the way of uh, brand deals, partnerships, or legal things to go over with Microsoft. It's all just about developers, the future of Windows. We're going to speculate a lot because one, we weren't there. Two, we don't have as many contacts as some of our peers in the industry. So we're going to kind of pontificate based on what they've said. I've been following a lot of people on YouTube, podcasts. I would assume so is David. So we're going to kind of refer to them, but we have a lot to talk about. Do you want to kind of just start us off with some general things about what you want to talk about as far as build is concerned?
Well, I think the elephant in the room is the PCs. You know, the Snapdragon Elite PCs have finally been announced, and Microsoft has updated the Surface. We've got the new Surface with the Snapdragon, but the OEMs came out as well. Dell came out with theirs. I've seen one by Asus. I've seen a couple by Lenovo. That 7S really has my attention because it is creator focused. But really, I think if you dig a little deeper, that Prism model that we talked about off mic several times this week, the Prism model with the translation model, that's going to be the focus for me because we've seen what Apple can do with this translation model. We've seen that most apps run on Apple with their ARM architecture, and they've not had any compatibility issues. And I think you made the comment in one of our discussions this week that if this translation model does not work and does not work well, everything we've done here with Snapdragon could be dead in the water. And the concern that I had when Apple came out with theirs, you were starting to see developers, hey, we've got our version. Hey, we've got our version. And you're not seeing that as much here with the Snapdragon offerings. You're not seeing the Slacks of the world, the things people use every day. Hey, we're ready for Windows on ARM. We've got this, version over here waiting for when those devices hit next week. So I think there's a lot of people that are putting a lot of weight on this translation model to do well.
Yeah, and by people, it's got to be Microsoft. Just to give some people who may be a little bit behind as far as what we're talking about, the transition layer basically allows Microsoft to kind of brute force operations from apps that were written for its older architecture, the x86 that's used basically that was written to Intel chips more specifically. So a lot of people back in the early days of Windows, up until about 2000 and I'd say almost 15, were writing apps that were designed to utilize Intel specific aspects of Intel chips, the way that they kind of architect their SoCs as far as the CPU and whatever dedicated GPUs they would put on there. The apps would pull from that chip. And then all of a sudden, ARM became a thing, and Microsoft started writing a layer for Windows on ARM that would basically say, all right, those apps, some of those apps, based on the way we write it, can tap into this chip and sort of work, kind of funky because it wasn't designed for it. We had these Surface Pro X, I believe, back in 2017 that came out. And it was one of Microsoft's first efforts, Microsoft specifically. Now, there have been other manufacturers, back in 2015, 2014, that have been kind of playing around with ARM chips ever since Microsoft kind of introduced this layer in Windows 8, I believe, wasn't it? Was the Windows RT?
Yep,
Was one of the
RT.
first was one of the first iterations. This is where if you bought Surface Pro RT, it was an ARM-based process with an ARM-based processor, and it had a version of Windows that offered the file system, made it look like Windows, but couldn't run any of the apps. And then they made the Surface Pro, which was basically just Windows. That's why that one was much thicker. It had a fan because, again, it was just doing the Intel version. Now, again, Windows and ARM has been worked on, tweaked on, and we thought by the Surface Pro X, which was almost, was that 5-7 years later, something like that, that they would have figured it out. And they didn't. It was still slow, and what more than anything, users were running into runtime errors. Apps just wouldn't download, install, or run, and so it was dead on arrival. Apple came out with their M series chip, and people thought, early on that was going to be a very similar thing. But because Apple has the cachet to kind of force developers to go with it, everyone kind of expected, okay, they're going to run into some similar bumps, but they're at least developers will come around to rewriting their apps. They didn't. They had Rosetta, which worked almost flawlessly right off the bat, which was a surprise to everybody, which is why Apple's transition was much smoother than a lot of people had predicted. And now Microsoft is saying that they have a layer that is on par, if not better than Rosetta, with Prism, meaning they went back and they rewrote the kernel of Windows 11 to work specifically for Snapdragon or Qualcomm Snapdragon X Elite chips. Now, part of Prism will work for older devices, not all the way back to the RT, but at least going back to the Surface Pro X, which was, again, back in 2017. And it'll give a bit of performance increase, not a lot, but it's showing you that if this thing that was developed, this, I'm guessing in the last 2 years or so, can backport some performance to that, imagine what it can do for stuff that is, for a chip that is specifically written to. And the idea is that this transition layer will speed up all the apps, or most of the x86 apps going forward, and make the ones that are written for it. When developers say, all right, I'm going to make a new app, I'm going to take my app that was old, like Slack, we're waiting for Slack to do it. I think Chrome is kind of, they've at least written to ARM, but if they write it specifically to this chip, you'll be getting, I think they said, what was it, almost 2x times the speed and performance of what you get on Windows, with a fraction of the CPU hit, or the heat or fan noise normally associated with this kind of performance jump. So that's where we're at for Prism. I'll let you pontificate a little bit more about, where does that leave Wintel? Because I think I posed the question to you, is that who's holding back Windows PCs? There's always been the question. Intel couldn't get the chips to run cool enough, quiet enough, or they couldn't get a silicon small enough to make, for the devices that people wanted, the thin, fanless devices? Or was it Microsoft's Windows that was just too bloated with code that it forced Intel to design a chip a certain specific way that held back the entire industry? Now with this Prism, it's going to say, hey, here's Microsoft's software, and we're not even using Intel. So if Prism works, then it was essentially Intel holding back. If it doesn't, now we'll know, hey, Microsoft, you just can't write software.
Well, there was something interesting this week, and I'm going to paraphrase here, and I'm not going to necessarily call out any names, but there was another very popular podcast that was at Build, that in their podcast they made the comment that Intel wanted to be a part of this. They wanted to come be a part of this announcement, and Microsoft said, no, this is our show. So what did we see? It was Monday, about halfway through, the headlines started surfacing that the Intel offering in this type of efficient chipset would be available this fall. So that was Intel's effort to try to throw a little shade on the whole thing. Well, I tend to believe, and this is just my opinion, you guys feel free to disagree, let's talk about it. I am afraid this is an Intel problem, because Intel has, the one thing they have never done, they have never produced the efficient, cool chip. They've tried many times with these U-series chips. Right, I'm using a U-series based Lenovo laptop right here. The fan's kicking. So that they have never produced that. Well, Microsoft finds a way to get the chip. If the software works, proof's in the pudding, as the saying goes.
No, I totally agree with you. There was some chip drama early on where again Intel, like you said, wanted to be on stage. They were invited at Build, or they were invited to the presentation. They had their badges and everything, and again, this is according to sources based on that podcast you're talking about. And they were there. They were getting ready to go, and I think right before the show kicked off, they were escorted out of the building. So it wasn't even necessarily like, "Hey, we didn't have time for you." It was like, "We don't even want you guys here to talk to press potentially if they ask questions later or whatnot." It was a weird thing. AMD, I mean, again, to the point, Microsoft was hugging Snapdragon very tightly, but they also mentioned a couple times that this performance is going to be coming, like this new version of Windows. And I believe for those of you who want to try and test it out, it's a Windows 11 24H2 update. Will be going and be delivered to Intel chips. Intel will have a part of this, what Microsoft's calling the Copilot plus PC revolution. I don't know how it's going to work with theirs. I think, to Snapdragon's credit, they have an NPU on the SoC. I think Intel has NPUs dedicated as well, but there are specific requirements for this to be considered. I guess what Microsoft's calling a Copilot plus PC, which includes the 40
TOPS. You gotta have those 40 TOPS.
And I don't think Intel, at least as far as we know, has a chip that can do that right now or coming up. And neither does AMD. NVIDIA has, GPUs that can perform that. So I wonder if they're going to somehow tap that, like they're going to pair their CPUs with, these dedicated GPUs in order to achieve that minimums, processing for stuff like we're going to get into it, recall and some other AI Copilot specific things, or are they just not going to have those things and they'll be considered Copilot minus PC or PC minus Copilot? I don't know how it's going to work for them if Microsoft says that's a requirement.
The branding on that is a little weird. How they have branded a Copilot. At first, I thought it was a Copilot plus PC, like they were, Copilot PC. We put them together, but they mean them as a Copilot plus PC as an extra feature.
Extra, yeah, exactly.
Type of PC. So to me, that was a bit confusing. Now, I was doing a little research last night, preparing to talk to you guys today, and I looked up a company that we have reviewed their stuff before. They're a Chinese company, GeekCom. They keep running advertisements that they've got the first AMD AI mini PC. So I looked it up and I was checking it out. It's the AMD 8000. So I dug a little deeper, and those particular chips are only 35 of those TOPS that we have talked about. So if Intel and AMD are below what Microsoft has considered the Copilot threshold to get that certification, that badge, if you will, that you can run all of these Copilot features that we're getting ready to talk about, it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with, number one, but how quickly they come up with it, I think is a solid number two, because according to what we see, even at retail outlets, these Copilot devices will be in customers' hands in less than 30 days. So, right there, decisions are going to be made. Intel and AMD better come up with whatever their solution is going to be so they don't lose buyers to the folks that have already adopted Snapdragon Elite X. It's going to get very interesting here the last quarter of this year.
Oh, and for specific reasons, we're going to get into, like I said, for recall, because once you get a PC, it's going to be much harder for you to move over to a new one if you're getting used to those kind of features, which again are coming out first. It'd be different if Microsoft introduced Intel and they didn't have this, And then they introduced Qualcomm and was like, here's Copilot Plus. Like, this is even better. So if you bought one, unfortunately, in June and you have buyer's remorse, maybe you can sell it and get this better one. But if this is the better one and the ones that come out after that are middling, to your point, it's, they're going to need to come up with some kind of marketing or some kind of way to do branding to say, hey, this is why you should still consider us. I have this last slide up for those of you who are listening. You can't see it, but there's a collection of apps that will be coming to this Windows on ARM, thanks in part to the Prism translation layer, such as Adobe's Premiere, Lightroom, I think Photoshop, basically the heavy hitters of that uh, uh, editing suite are going to be coming.
Spotify.
And yeah, and I think they're supposed to be coming by, I believe, the end of fall, if I'm not mistaken, at the latest, probably sooner than that. And that's a big deal because that was something the Surface Pro X didn't have. And they kind of showed, what rendering is like, what using DaVinci Resolve, I believe, is also going to be on this version of ARM. They're making dedicated apps. This is to your point about people really buying in on this, that in a way that they hadn't done it in Windows 8 when they first introduced it in RT, or hadn't done it for the Surface Pro X. Everyone just kind of was hoping the translation layer would do all of the work, all the heavy lifting, and Microsoft failed on that aspect, and developers didn't really do an uptick for this. Even for Rosetta 2, Apple had to have Adobe rewrite and make an ARM version of their software to work for the Macs, and it works pretty well. It's Adobe, so it's still heavy, it crashes sometimes, but at least works much better than it did for the Surface Pro X. And this is where Microsoft can make huge gains if this transition layer works, because now they can say, hey, a Surface Pro is the only device you need, and you can do all of your graphic editing on it. And we're talking, in 4K, RAW, 8K, hundreds of layers, and still run relatively quiet, if not silent, cool, and for 10 plus hours. That is what a lot of creatives have. That's the marketing Apple's had for the last 3-4 years since they've had their transition. And if they can cut into that, I think that's going to be huge. Other apps that are coming, I believe, are Zoom. They're going to be, I think WhatsApp has already done their ARM version. The only one we didn't really hear about is Slack, and I know Slack's the big thing for a lot of people. So we'll have to see what they do there. I hope they don't try and, stall and say, hey, use our web app, because their web app isn't the best. But again, that's just the beginning. That's starting in June. So ideally, more people will roll it. I think Chrome already started writing theirs for ARM at the beginning of this year.
Yep. I want to throw one more thing in there just for us old folks.
Yeah.
I came from my first PC was Windows 3.0 MS-DOS, and for those that remember, you had a command prompt. You typed in the Windows command, you got your GUI. And then we went to Windows 95. It scared a lot of people because it took that command prompt out of the way, because when you booted your machine, you saw the GUI first. The reason I bring this up was around that time frame, we went from the 16-bit PC to the 32-bit PC. Then later on, Windows Millennium, Windows 98, we moved up to 64-bit apps. And we had a very similar issue back then, because there were certain apps that would run and certain apps that wouldn't run. Point being, once you get developer support on new hardware and your developers buy into it, like we're starting to see here finally with ARM, you're going to go somewhere. I'm not saying you're going to make it. I'm not saying how far you're going to make it. But I have to give the old guys over there in the fruit company a little bit of props. They did it. They've done it.
No, they did it well, and
they've not produced an Intel PC in what, 4 years?
I think they had the Intel ones for about a year and a half. I think they're fully transitioning in the M series at least the last year, definitely, if not maybe possibly 2.
But they've done it. So I think we're looking at what Microsoft can do. And as we like to tease Microsoft sometimes here on the pod and the website, Sometimes Microsoft's late to the party with the thing, but when they join that party, they bring the party. And I think
Well,
this time Microsoft is bringing the party.
yeah, and ideally, because of the way that this transition layer sort of acts like as a VM, a lot of these apps are, at least the ones on your phone that you're very accustomed to, that people have become very close to, have been written for this already. So developers basically can go in, and there's a new dev kit or dev environment that's entirely dedicated to doing this transition that Microsoft introduced as well. But they should have, again, I say this not being a developer, a relatively easy time taking the phone experience, stuff that was written for Android, apps that are written for ARM on Android, and bringing them over to Windows on ARM, because of all the tools that will be accessible and the architecture that it's written for. They won't be going from ARM to x86, they'll be going from ARM to ARM. So hopefully the buy-in will be easy. We're going to move on to recall. We had mentioned that. We've brought that up several times, and you're probably scratching your head if you weren't following build or under a rock, or just touching grass, enjoying life. But we're going to bring you back into the tech world with that. Give everyone kind of a general idea what recall is.
Well, I'm going to be fair with you. I don't think we know exactly what all recall is going to be, but I look at it to put it in. I'm going to put this in plain, simple English terms. It is recording everything that goes on your PC, and you can access, get back to your habits, your files. Everything is recorded. You can search your documents. You can go back and say, on May 1st, I did this, to a spreadsheet in Microsoft Excel. Can you find it? You can get back to that. Now, let's be clear about something. This is not just a feature that suddenly works. There is a Copilot integration part of this. You know, Copilot will be who you are asking the question, and then Copilot is able to look these things up locally on your PC, which touches on what you were talking about. This is built into your PC in the sense that when you go to another PC, that information may not be available. So if you've got a work PC, you're going to have Windows. Now, I'm skipping the fact that your employer may not have provided you access to it. But if you've got a work PC that has recall on it, you will have access to that data on the work PC. You go home, you've got access to the data on your home PC. There is no crossover or no crossover yet. I know we, had a little speculation conversation off mic about what happens and how do they cross that over. We talked about putting the language model for it in OneDrive. We talked about allowing them to charge for OneDrive to supplement this. Windows Recall to me is cool, but I also think it's a little bit limited. I'm not sure how many people are actually going to use it, to be honest.
Well, yeah, to your point, some of the details of recall is basically what it does is it takes a snapshot of everything that's happening on your PC every 3 seconds, and stores that, uses the NPU, which is going to be required by all chips going forward in order to process it. It takes up a minimum dedicated space or hard drive space of 50 gigabytes. So it has its own dedicated thing. So you're going to need I think Microsoft said a minimum of 256 gigs in order to have this feature. Plus, you're going to need the new chips with the NPUs that are able to process and kind of crunch all of the screen data. For those of you who are listening, we were showing kind of a clip. Our friends over at Windows Central were able to get some hands-on with it. But it's a new version of search for Windows, and it will pull up any and all things that are related to the search that you can use in natural language. So if you're saying, I need to, find a specific body of water that you were thinking about. Like, where is that river that I was in, Norway, that I was looking at? It'll pull up documents that are related to it. So if you have planned trips, or you have a conversation with people in WhatsApp, or if were just searching on Google, and you pick up pictures, it'll grab all of that, and through a timeline at the top that you'll be able to scroll through in order to kind of see the thumbnails of each of these snapshots and say, oh, that's what I was specifically looking at. And you can recall it. And you can actually interact with that screenshot. So if there were links available on there, if there's text that you need to pull from it, if there's a recording or a video that you're watching, you can re-engage that if the video is still online somewhere. So that is recall, sort of, again, in a nutshell. But to your point about being limited, again, we haven't had any additional information about it, but our buddy Paul Throd had talked about it. The way it works is that it is encrypted. It is on device. And so Microsoft doesn't have access to it. It's the same way that Apple encrypts their messaging or anything that happens on their phone. They don't have access to it. They just capture it and close it and lock it away, so that nobody really has access to it. You don't have access to it beyond using it. So if the police were to confiscate your laptop or whatever, there's no way to really get into it unless you gave them the password and access to it. So for people who are worried about that, it doesn't go to any cloud to be processed. Again, they use the NPUs, neural processing units, on the device to crunch all of this. So it isn't, like I said, it isn't like they go to the cloud to pull up and process all of that and then shoot it back down to your laptop or anything like that. This recall is meant to be used offline as well. So again, you won't necessarily, that's how you kind of know that it's not going to any servers, because you don't need internet connection in order to pull it. And to David's point, it isn't associated to an account. It is associated to the device. So if you wipe your device for whatever reason, say you got a bad insider build or whatever, and you need to restart it and wipe it fresh, all of that information, if you've been using Recall for a full year and you've been able to go back years worth and grab information, that'll all be wiped. You'll have to start all over again. Or if you upgrade your device, you'll have to start all over again, because it is only for the specific device. So that's what we meant about Intel coming in after Snapdragon, because these Snapdragon devices, such as the Surface Pro 10, I guess we call it, whatever they're calling this version, and the Surface Laptop, the most recent ones that use this NPUs, they were coming out next month, and they will be enabled with this off the bat, because they have the what is it called? The
TOPS.
Yeah, in order to enable this. I don't know about AMD. I don't know about NVIDIA. I don't know about Intel. But they at least don't necessarily right now meet the minimum requirements to run this thing. So if you're going to buy devices, most people will probably start buying the Surface devices, perhaps some of the Lenovo ones, if they're using the same Snapdragon processor, or Dell, Asus, whatever. All of the partners who are using this specific chip will have these devices out next month. And if you buy one and Intel comes out with something that you might like, it's not guaranteed that you'll be able to use this feature. And if you were to be able to use this feature, you can't transfer anything that you've acquired between that month or whenever they come out the new device.
I'm going to speculate here for just a minute. This is total speculation. I don't think we'll be in this situation for long. I think if recall works well, and from everything Microsoft has shown or hinted at, we have no reason to believe that it won't. I have multiple PCs in my household. You count review units. We've got, there's a half a dozen PCs and devices that I have access to. And you and I spoke about it. It's nice that we have recall. It's nice that it is based on the PC for security purposes. There's also this thing over there in OneDrive called the Vault, where you can supposedly lock your stuff up and it's encrypted. I don't use it very much. I do have a few personal things in there, yes. But what if there's a way to use the cloud to store enough of this information to where you could pick up one device, and say, hey, click something. I'm not saying you carry it all around with you. You're connected to the internet. You open up something in OneDrive, you click something in the operating system. So now you have access to what's on all of your PCs because we don't all do the same. I know I don't. We don't all do the same thing on the same PC. Like I've got, things I do for gaming that's on a gaming PC, things I do for our site that's on a PC. It's based on where am I at in the house? What do I pick up? What's convenient? Where am I going? What PC did I pick up to serve the purpose? So Microsoft says, look, it's in the cloud. You can access, you know, maybe you enter a password, you have to give some sort of biometric authentication, it should be secure. And you can suddenly get to data or at least links to your data to know things exist across all of your devices. Now you have my attention. The one device thing is great, that's a start. But most people these days have more than one. And I think we've got to get to the point where you can access the model on all of your devices from one single device.
No, I totally agree with you. They're going to obviously work that out with enterprise first. This
Yep.
will probably be a paid feature of some sort, and then it'll trickle down to us probably a few years later. To your point, maybe in a version of needing a Microsoft account, because again, there are still people who use Windows without a Microsoft account, which is why this on-device aspect is probably nice and great for them. But I'm sure they're going to want to tie this to a Microsoft account. Again, maybe to tie it to OneDrive, or maybe just to get offer you encryption keys that you can ask for when starting up a new device, and be like, here you go, here's your encryption key for whatever that thing that you wanted was for, to pull that information down from the cloud or from wherever you're storing it necessarily. Or maybe they'll just offer you Microsoft branded USB keys or something like that. I have no idea. There's going to be a future for this. I mean, I assume 5 years down the road, this will just be search at some point. This, the same way people search on the computer now without worrying about, oh, who's looking at it. Because again, we search on our computers for files constantly. And I'm not necessarily going like, who's able to see that I'm requesting my income tax information from 4 years back currently on my devices. So I don't see Copilot, if that's what it's supposed to be doing, being that different. And I think also specifically, it won't show. Oh no, I think it does show. And then this is what they're warning people about. It does show passwords that you put in. So if you were buying something at the time, it'll show the passwords. It'll show phone numbers, stuff like that. So this is part of that. Maybe they'll figure out a way to kind of void those delicate details in order to say, all right, we'll store it in the cloud. We won't sell the information to anybody, but we'll at least keep it on our servers. And when you ask for it, it'll come back down with, redacted information going forward. There's a lot to go on with that. More importantly, the feature seems to work very smoothly. That's part of the adoption on this thing. It isn't like it's chunky and you can see it lagging as it's trying to do it. At least from the demos that we've seen so far, everyone's been able to get in and get out of this thing, which, like I said, is, I think 90% of the battle is making sure that it's something people want to use, can use, and can recommend to other people, versus saying, I tried it. Same thing with Windows Search. And it brought up a bunch of stuff. None of it was relevant. I had to go and do, my own version of searching or grabbing the information I needed. If this thing can just grab everything and you kind of sort out yourself, and it does so quickly and natively, we'll be having further discussions. Versus, you remember Timeline, guys? Remember when that was a thing, and it didn't work as sold because developers didn't buy into it. Microsoft wrote it. This is Timeline revised. This time, developers don't need to buy in on it because it takes screenshots of everything. The first time they tried to do Timeline, developers had to opt in to have their apps used in the Timeline basis. So there was only just the native Windows apps that were usually displayed. And if people wanted to say, hey, I was having an experience in Reading app or the Music app or Slack or Teams, that wouldn't show up. What were you going to say?
I think you and I are more technical than a lot of folks, and there's some timeline, it brought me to something consumer related that people are not aware of. Was Apple has this thing called Time Machine. Now, why do I bring up Time Machine? I bring that up for a very
Because you love bringing up Apple.
but Time Machine is the backup tool for Windows users, and I'll leave it at that. This is not an Apple podcast. But when you go to recover something, I get the image of how this recall feature may work. Because when you go to recover something, the Apple Time Machine file does not show the files on your computer. It has an encrypted name. It's the file name Apple gives it. When you open it in the Time Machine viewer, then you can see your files at 11:58 a.m., 12 a.m., or 12 p.m., 12:02, 12:04, and you can see those folders and those individual files, because that is something neat that Windows users may not have had a chance to experience. Time Machine takes those snapshots every few minutes, and you can only view those snapshots on that machine. It is in encrypted form and can even be password protected, and in the new Apple or Mac OS, I think it can even be 2FA. So we may see, we may see recall be something, when recall is fully fleshed out. I'm thinking that's what we're going to see, because I opened up Time Machine this morning when I thought about this on a Mac. You can search your Time Machine backup to some degree. Now, my Time Machine backups are stored off network or off PC. It takes time for those searches to produce themselves. So for Windows users, since we've got these AI chips, we should be able to get these results nearly instantly. It's going to be interesting to see how Microsoft handles all that, because I think the EU, let me give them a shout out, the FTC, I think we're going to have to turn around and have more discussion about security as we walk through this process.
I totally agree. And transitioning over to our next topic, which is the PCs, the things that you're going to be running these devices on. We got, on Monday, Microsoft came out. I do want to start off by saying I am impressed at the level of secrecy that they were able to maintain going into this event.
We tried, folks. We tried.
We wanted to see screenshots. We wanted to see, leaks or whatever. We got
nothing. Now, anything.
With that being said, the Surface laptop, the newer version, and the Surface Pro, the newer version, aren't drastic changes. So I guess there wasn't a lot for people to differentiate. It was going to be very hard for people to see a closed laptop or a turned off Surface Pro and be like, that's the different one. All of the stuff seems to be kind of more under the hood. There are some aesthetic design changes, but they're very minimal. We got the Surface laptop that runs on ARM now, with slimmer bezels, a rounded profile as far as the bezels are concerned, and the laptop itself. We're going to get the same port selections that we have on the Surface laptop Studio, sans the micro SD, so you get another USB-C port on one side. You get the Surface connector. I believe you get a USB-A as well, and a headphone jack. It comes in two different sizes. I think you get a 13 and a 15-inch one. I believe, does the Surface laptop have the OLED screen, or is that reserved just for the Pro?
I think that's reserved just for the Pro.
Okay, so you get the LCD or the ISP, whatever display on it. But IPS. I mean, again, yeah, you do get a haptic trackpad. It does, and I know people were questioning this, it does come with a fan. So despite these being much, ideally fanless designs that everyone was kind of hoping for, this thing does still have a fan. So this is less like the MacBook Air, which Microsoft kept continually positioning this against, and more like the MacBook Pro, which still has an ARM chip but has a fan in case it hits any type of heat load that needs to kind of exhaust. Now Microsoft did retool the entire cooling system in this thing, so it wasn't like they just I think Apple kind of did this early on with the first M1, is where they took the chip and just dropped it into the chassis of an old design, and then a year later updated the design to have mostly more fanless versions of these things, much thinner ones. I think Microsoft's kind of doing a similar one where they're dropping it into a similar design, and maybe with more power, more efficiency next year, we'll get the thinner device that everyone was kind of hoping for. But we're at least getting a functional version versus going too thin and getting too hot and having to retrack and go back and adding fans or figuring out different ways to kind of cool it with heat sinks and all this. They're just saying, let's get it out and going. If it cools like it's supposed to, then we'll work on making it thinner. Now, those are just the two devices from Microsoft. We'll get into Pro a little bit more in a second. But there are supposed to be devices coming from Asus, Dell, HP, and Lenovo, all starting June 18th. Most of them will be starting at $999. Again, various upgrades might get you closer to $2,000 once you're all done. But for $999, and the base model CPU, the thing that we're all kind of basing all of this on, and the new Prism architecture, that's pretty good. You're supposed to be getting, at a minimum, I think it's 10 to 12 hours of battery life for actual usage. And then if you get standby or video mode, some device makers are claiming 24 hours, which is extraordinary. But again, this is on the base model. So, and I think the base model for Copilot Plus PCs is 16 gigabytes, 256 gigs of memory, and these new chips with the NPUs in it. So that's what you get for $999 for most manufacturers. And, like Lenovo and Dell and HP, a lot of these things will go on sale probably the following month. So you could be looking at $700, $800.
Well, I think there'll be a lot of those 999 units bought out of the gate, because people that we've got to figure out, how far does the Plus chip get us? When do I need that Elite Series chip? Just like we've had to figure out, how far does the Intel Core i5 get me? When do I need that i7? When do I need that i9? So, and I think, those are things we've got to figure out, first of all. And something I have found interesting, there is the bare minimum of 16 gigs of RAM on these devices to be able to run the Copilot features that we've been talking about. I keep seeing words about the 32 gig SKUs. I've not seen them on a site with a price yet. When I was first looking, Microsoft talked about it, but
I think Microsoft has it on their site now.
They did day before yesterday when I was looking. It may be out there now. I did see also, just as an FYI, because this crossed my mind during build, that nobody talked about having a 4G, 5G connected option. Microsoft has put a note on their site that the ones with the the broadband connectivity will be coming later this year. So if you're looking for that broadband connectivity, you might have to hold off a little while. I did not see anything from the Lenovo, Dell, Asus, Acer that they were doing connectivity, but I suspect later in the year that they will also offer probably some business models with the connectivity option.
That's what I always wonder about these connectivity ones, because everyone, like, we hear people talk about it, but how often do people use them? Because again, it requires a separate plan, and unless people are having their companies pay for them, I don't know if you or I were going to be like, oh, let me get the 5G Surface Pro because I just really need to do work while I'm driving to the beach or something like that. It's more like, again, they have Wi-Fi 7 on these devices, so I'll just be connecting to, the Starbucks portal. Unfortunately, as unsecure as it is, I get it, everybody. I'll probably be connecting to that more often than I would be using 5G. So I wonder if they're just prioritizing, like saying, all right, we'll do it because there will be businesses who want to have their employees mobile, but it's not the first thing out of the gate that's necessary.
Here's the kick on that, because I have seen some company talk about this in some of my things in the past. It comes down to the cell phone plan. not necessarily the device in this case. Think
Mhm.
about it. We've got AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile. They've all, if you get to a certain tier, you've got unlimited data. And that unlimited data is the data that is accessed via the phone. Now, I know there's people out there that modify the SIM cards. I get it. That's not where I'm going. But each phone has a limit on the hotspot data, 5 gig, 10 gig, 20 gig. So if you take just a Wi-Fi PC, you can tether it to your phone and you're limited to that hotspot data. Now, if a consumer or a business puts an unlimited plan on this device, then their employees or consumers, you and I, have a device that we can walk around with that has unlimited data. Now,
Mhm.
for some people, we've talked about it, that don't have access to good broadband via a wireline, that may very well be an option for them. To buy that 5G device, pay that extra 10 or 15 bucks a month or more to get that line added to that unlimited plan, to have a device that has a broadband connection to watch videos, stream, and do their work from home. I think we see more of this than we used to. I know I'm going to be the first to admit I have a connected device. I use it. Now, do I use it enough to make it suitable for the 20 bucks a month I pay for it? That's up for debate, but it's one of those things. It's there when you need it. And a lot of people
Yeah.
like that.
I just wanted to clarify too for those of you who are again wanting to revive the Mac versus Mac versus PC comparisons. Uh, yeah, Microsoft is saying that these Copilot plus PCs, and I think they're at least using their service devices as a barometer for now. We'll see how others perform. Will perform up to 58% better in sustained multi-threaded performances. And the difference is basically, as far as battery is concerned, delivering up to 22 hours of local video playback or 15 hours of web browsing on a single charge. That's what they're saying. So it's about 20% more battery in local video playback than the MacBook Air. That's their claim. So again, we are, if they, Microsoft likes to shoot for the moon. So does Dell. I think they all, Dell is, I think, one of the more uh, bombastic as far as the battery claims are. But if they can get halfway or 75% of what they're saying, these are still a substantial mark above what Intel PCs were offering. We'll also be getting access to more enhanced Windows Studio filters and image editing and audio isolation aspects. Again, this is the Copilot Plus that you were talking about, so it's Copilot Plus more stuff. We'll get access to faster or what is it? Faster recharge ports. I mean, faster charging ports, so you get supercharging for some of these devices. And you'll also be, I think, at least for the Surface devices, they've upgraded their front-facing cameras, I believe, now to 4K and wider viewing angles. I think you get 180 degrees now for a lot of these. So you won't necessarily need to be pairing any of these devices with webcams anymore. You should be able to just take this one device and do your Zoom meetings or your Slack meetings as is with all of the filters and functions of what we've been getting from webcams. So that'll at least save you anywhere from, depending on how much you spend on a webcam, 50 to some people spending 200 bucks for dedicated cameras and stuff like that. That should save you as well doing that going forward. I'm pretty excited for these devices. I'm a admitted Surface fan, but I saw the Lenovo's got a version coming out. I don't know if it's the Yoga 9 or something like that. That looks really sleek, and I'm waiting to get my hands on that bad boy as well. So that's what we get as far as the Copilot Plus PC hardware aspect of this. I'm going to get into a breakdown of build stuff, but I know this podcast is running long, so I'm going to kind of just run through some of the highlights that we got from build as far as what people can expect. We'll cover some more of this stuff obviously next week and as we go into more things. But we got, I believe, real-time translation is going to be coming to devices with that have Copilot Plus PC. So, and that'll be across all apps that are accessed on the device. So you won't just be like, oh, here's a first party, translation app from Microsoft. This will be if you're using Zoom, if you're using Slack, if you're using Skype, if you're using something on the web. It just basically listens to all the audio going through and it'll process it. So again, if you're speaking to your Korean family members, it'll start translating that in real time, back and forth, and produce a transcript. So if they need to see or read what you're saying, or vice versa, for whatever reason, maybe future context, you'll be getting access to that. There are some GitHub Copilot experiences that we're leaning into extensibility. This is more the developer stuff, but GitHub introduced its first set of GitHub Copilot extensions that were developed by Microsoft and its third-party partners. You get GitHub Copilot for Azure as one of the extensions, I believe, that Microsoft specifically showcased. We get the new frontier models and multi-model capabilities in Azure AI. Again, this is all developer stuff, but at least as far as GPT-4o is concerned, that is going to be baked in right off the bat. So you get all of those new capabilities from OpenAI's models right off the bat. Microsoft has been working, and I think this is how they're doing a lot of their processing on device, is that they're using their small language models. And I believe that these are called the Phi family, Phi-3 family, PHI-3 family. There's Phi-3 Vision. There's, I forget the other ones are, but these are the small language models that were dedicated to doing specific tasks that require AI. And these are all going to be, again, built into, or at least take advantage of those MPUs specifically. Again, this will, some of them will be used for translating images or image to or text to image stuff. And I think there's a thing called Co-Creator that will be built into, I believe, is it Paint or is it its own app? I think it's its own app, right?
Yeah, I believe that. So.
Yeah, it's essentially, imagine using, Microsoft Paint on steroids. You can start to draw stuff, and then you can have the AI finish it and make it polished or look a little better, or give you more ideas as you draw, kind of what you want to do. There's a small language model dedicated to just translating that kind of stuff. There are other Phi-3 models that will be used, again, like I said, for audio processing, for memory and search recalls or whatnot. Microsoft had a partnership with Khan Academy that they talked about with their AI, and basically Khan Academy will be using Microsoft's Azure and its Copilot features. And then in turn, Microsoft will get access to, I believe, feedback from Khan Academy on ways that they can kind of improve this. Again, they'll also be making use of these Phi-3 small language models going forward. There's new partnerships with Cognition AI. Microsoft and Cognition will be bringing the autonomous AI software agent, Devin, to customers to help them with complex tasks such as code migration and modernization projects. So again, developers who are looking to kind of move or port entire projects over will be able to do so in a much easier, more intuitive fashion. There are new virtual machines, and obviously because some of these transition layers rely on VMs. This makes more sense. But Microsoft has a new unique system approach to AI infrastructure, which includes hardware and software from Microsoft and other partners. I believe AMD's leading MI300X AI accelerator chips will be part of this partnership to kind of power Azure OpenAI services. We knew about Cobalt, I think, was the chips, and you and I were talking off mic about that are super impressive, that have been working. Cobalt is the 100 ARM-based virtual machine chips that Microsoft is allowing businesses to kind of tap into to kind of process and run their data or whatnot. Again, AMD will be using some of that going forward. There's also, I believe there was Copilot Studio is introducing new agent capabilities, empowering developers to build copilots that can run proactively respond to data and events tailored to specific tasks and functions. So you can basically go into Copilot Studio and create a developer-focused copilot of your own that'll just run on its own. So if you want to say, hey, I need you to check code for this every so often, and when you find an error or whatever, apply these things based on all kind of mitigating factors. You can go in and basically type that in with natural language and build out a copilot of your own to kind of work on that kind of stuff, which I think is pretty impressive. There's some new Teams Copilot stuff that'll be Microsoft will be kind of unveiling more of in Microsoft 365 going forward. Again, these are stuff for Loop and Planner, creating kind of extensions into that to automate a lot of processes in Teams that you might need. I believe that's the gist of some of the stuff that was at least announced during the keynote. There was some other stuff that came out in sessions, but I just want to make sure before we end the pod that we talk to some of the developer things that were obviously from Copilot from Microsoft, because you and I like the PCs, we like the software for some of the stuff, but we need developers to like the PCs. We need them to like the software. We need them to make even more software enabled experience for us, so we can talk about this kind of stuff. Is there anything else you were to kind of talk about before we kind of bring this section to a close, at least?
I want to say two quick things since you brought up our developers. We covered this 2-3 weeks ago. There was a series of stories that came out about developer burnout. With all this AI stuff, I want to say thank you to our developers that are spending the long hours, that are doing this coding for us to have these features. You know, you guys are the truck drivers, if you will, in the industrial world. Without the truck drivers, there's no merchandise on the shelf. Without the developers pushing these models and pushing the limits of these models and your skills, we don't get to do these things. We don't get to see these things. Thank you for doing it. And I want to flip that discussion and ask you, as well as anybody that wants to leave us a comment. We keep hearing about language model, automation. There's no cohesiveness yet. Microsoft has the Copilot way. Facebook has the Meta way. I've seen their little model come up. I've seen, Bard, Gemini come up. Google has theirs. I get confused sometimes covering these models as to who has what, who does what. Some of it comes down to marketing. Who presents it better to make the consumer make the choice? We know that Copilot is built into Microsoft Windows. Is anybody feeling automation burnout yet? As you're hearing this, what do I choose? What do I do? How can it help me? What model do I need? What developer do I need? What service do I need? I still feel like there's a place for company XYZ to be your AI consultant. You come to us, you have a task, this is how you accomplish it. Because even as I was watching Build with you, and I'm making notes and I'm writing all these things down, even I was getting confused. Well, okay, which model, which tool do I need to accomplish a task? And that's what these businesses are going to have to start figuring out. Well, we want to automate our sales reports on how many blue t-shirts we sold last year, how many blue t-shirts with designs, and what to do. Well, that's if you want to do it with your own model and have it in-house, where do you go to build that model? What tools do you use? Microsoft is showing us tools. They're showing us it can be done. But I think on the buyer's end, there's going to be a lot of confusion, and those things still need to be worked out, because I know as I was watching Build, I got confused at times. I'm going to say it. We went from this model to this model to this feature with this model. We need some common names. Microsoft's naming scheme has been up for debate through the years at times. We need some common naming schemes to help these businesses better leverage these devices, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And this is where Microsoft sales teams need to sharpen up their marketing things as far as, again, selling these products. Microsoft is continually, every seems to be chopping and cutting and archetyping a new sales team. That seems to be the first things to go when they do kind of an overhaul of employees or whatnot. So I wonder if they or at least settled on a group of individuals who are now capable of selling these products. Because as much as you and I beg for name conventions, I think the sales team just has to go sell the product, kind of go show, hey, you bought Microsoft 365 and all of its the bells and whistles. Here's what the bells and whistles do. You may not know exactly what the term is, but when you ask your IT guy to grant access to Sally down down the office hallway, access to this specific feature because you need this task done, the sales team has to say, this is how it should work. This is this is what we sold you. This is what you'll be getting going forward. As far as the rest of us, again, this is all back end stuff. This is stuff for developers to know, and this is why they have conferences like this, and why they had over 300 sessions over the last 3.5, 4 days, is so that developers can go and meet with some people at Microsoft and say, hey, I'm looking to do this one specific thing, or these three specific things for my job. Where's the product, or what is the thing? And they say, all right, here it is. Here's the thing. Unfortunately, it's tied to a bunch of other stuff, whatever. But here's the thing. You and I, we don't necessarily need to know that. We just need to know, hey, because that developer went back in May, talked to somebody who knew what they were doing, and the product worked, here's the end result. You get a much faster web app. You get a much faster, tie-in from your calculator to your Excel documents or whatnot. Like, these are the kind of things. So, but to your point, I think Microsoft threw a bunch of stuff at us, said build, threw it against the wall, threw it at all developers because they just want to kind of show you what they've been working on for the past year. Now they need to take the next 6 months and iron out all those things. Make sure that their roadmaps are on time. Nothing gets delayed or pulled back. All of the features that they're saying that should be coming come when they need to, and they work like they're supposed to, or at least how they've been demoed. And hopefully, Qualcomm and Microsoft and the Windows people who've re-engineered the kernel have laid the base work for everything else to kind of come on top and work like it's supposed to. And we do get this eventual PC evolution that everybody's kind of hoping for and banking on, and nothing kind of falls to the wayside. So we'll be finding out reviews from these devices. I think reviewers and hopefully ourselves will be getting these devices next month, and we'll be able to tell you, like, hey, Microsoft's for real this time around. The Surface Pro X was them hoping, and they were waiting on Intel, and they were waiting on Qualcomm to create these things, and they couldn't do it, and that they are the software company that we thought they were, or they tried and came close, maybe next year.
Well, and I'm gonna kind of put a button on it here. There's going to be bugs, to use a software developer term. There's going to be issues. There's going to be incompatibility. There's going to be expectations that are not met. I don't expect my Surface Pro running the Snapdragon X Elite chip with an OLED screen to play Call of Duty. I don't expect that. And I don't expect every app to work the minute I open my Surface. Again, it's going to go back to the developers. How quickly after I make my purchase does my favorite set of XYZ apps work? If the developers aren't on top of it for the XYZ apps that people need, then the device gets pushed to the other side of the desk. They pick the Intel AMD device back up. They go back to work. Then you start seeing the posts on social media. I spent $1,500 on this device. Microsoft said would do this. It doesn't do this for me. It's no good. People put that social media, like I just did, kind of that social media exaggeration on it. So we've got 2-3 podcasts left, maybe before June 18th. And I'm going to try to say this every week because as we get closer, we're going to learn more. This is great. As you said, next evolution. We're here, we're doing. But you've got to set those expectations realistically. Microsoft has gone out there and set the lofty balloon of what we can do. Remember, they want to sell it. As consumers, what Kareem uses every day in some ways is different than what I use every day. What may work for him may not work for me, and vice versa. Just because I buy this device and I buy into what we're doing, and I open my box on June 18th and something doesn't load, don't give up on it. I
Well,
think that,
ideally,
I
this is
think
what Prism's supposed to do.
stop there and say, don't give up on it, because we've been through computing evolution before. We survived them. We're going through another one. We will survive this one.
Well, with that being said, where can people find you if they want to complain that their new device isn't working?
Complain all you want. I'm still out there on Threads, and I'm even gonna call it X this week.
Oh, you finally gave up, huh?
But you see, they changed their website this week. They actually made it X.com
I know.
and put out the terms of service. So I'm being a good guy here. I'm David PHA 1978 on Threads and on X. Come have the discussion. I have time to have this discussion. This is me. This is what I enjoy. You guys are welcome.
Yeah, you can find me at Mindhead1 on Twitter. I still call it that no matter what, because X just sounds dumb and sounds like I'm at an OnlyFans site. You can also find me at
Oh,
Kareem Anderson. I know. You can find me at Kareem Anderson, Threads, and Instagram as well. If you also want to complain that your PC isn't working in a couple weeks from now, because I'll probably be undergoing, mine isn't working either. Let's all kind of hold hands and figure out on Reddit how to fix these things. But I suspect that Prism will do a lion's share of the carrying, and there will be some outliers, some stuff that's probably written for ActiveX that shouldn't be working now that isn't going to be working. People will complain about that. But with that being said, we want to thank you guys for joining us for another week. It was, a relatively short podcast, but again, we were talking about some stuff that has a lot of TM coming soon. Again, we haven't seen any of the devices. We haven't got our hands on the devices yet. We haven't been able to test this new emulation layer. When we start seeing that stuff, we'll be talking about it more. So just stay tuned. Visit the website. We have a lot that we covered about build. We'll be covering even more stuff. As again, there's more news kind of trickling out from the sessions that we will be catching up on. So don't be mad if there's things that we haven't covered yet. We will be getting around to it. We just are waiting to hear the full story versus writing you a developing one. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
have a good weekend, everybody.